Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk, and tonight I am going to be reacting to From Aerobatics to Terror Bombing, Civil Aviation Between Two Wars 1927 Part 2 of 2 by Time Ghost History. Okay, let's start. Remember, if you want to check out my previous reactions to other Between Two Wars videos, remember the playlist card will be at the top. Just click on it and you'll be able to access them. 3, 2, 1, go.
Lindbergh, Earhart, barnstorming, and more. The 1920s saw major changes in the skies as airplanes, once only the province of the military or the eccentric, went mainstream. This was the golden age of aviation. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately, humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. In our episode about the development of aviation shortly after the Great War, we left off with the normalization of aircraft in a non-military context and the founding of the first commercial airlines. In the 1920s, the development of aviation truly takes off, resulting in the golden era of aviation. After the war, many nations were stuck with thousands of military airplanes for which they no longer had any use. In America, for example, the government was stuck with a bunch of Curtiss JN-4 Jenny biplanes, originally used for training pilots. These they cheaply sold or auctioned, allowing Air Force veterans or other enthusiasts to buy their own plane for as little as $200. This soon allowed the general public to be introduced to the art of aviation.
Imagine the military giving you military aircraft, selling it at $200. Just imagine that happening in our modern time. You know, the most advanced, technologically advanced fighter planes. Of course, they'll take out the weapon systems from these planes, but, you know, they'll still give them to the public, to civilians who can afford them. Just imagine that.
One phenomenon that came out of this civilian purchase of aircraft is barnstorming. At first, this was mostly former military pilots who would fly from town to town. It was a nomad lifestyle, and they were often referred to as gypsy flyers. It also allowed many without a military background to reach the skies, and many famous barnstormers were women or men and women of color. After a few
Barnstormers? Why are they called barnstormers? Are they storming into barns? Okay.
to create some hype with the locals, they would land on or near a barn somewhere, hence the name barnstormers, to perform aerial stunts and have people pay to fly along for a while. Towns came to a standstill wherever they showed up, as the entire community rushed to the chosen barn to behold the flying acrobatics.
But this is kind of dangerous, isn't it? I mean, anything can happen in this kind of situation. Flying so low, and then you have people doing their aerobatics and other forms of entertainment on the plane. This sounds very dangerous.
Many people in rural areas had never seen a real-life airplane flying before, especially in the late teens and early 20s. The pilots would show off their flying skills. And keep in mind, they did not have to have any qualifications like pilot's licenses or take into account any safety regulations, as there were none. Anyhow, they did all kinds of tricks like loop-the-loops and nose dives or spins. Some took it a step further by wing walking, playing tennis on them, or even switching planes mid-air.
This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. I just saw... what? This is crazy.
The decade unfolded, more and more of them explored new ways to stand out from the crowd. Some tried stuff like flying through a barn's open door, which often resulted in a dead pilot and many dollars of property damage. In fact, 470 accidents were reported between 1921 and 1923, resulting in 221 deaths. The Aeronautical Chamber of Commerce of America argued that the high rate of accidents was because of a lack of federal control. This, and a growth of the aviation industry in general, contributed to new regulation in 1925 and 1926. For the first time, aircraft had to be inspected and approved for airworthiness, and airmen had to pass a written and a physical test before they would be allowed to take to the skies. Also, the minimum height off the ground, where pilots now would be allowed to perform their stunts, was higher than was practical for a viewing audience on the ground, which put a real damper on barnstorming. Though the regulation did not entirely extinguish barnstorming, which would continue into the 40s, it greatly impacted and restricted civil aviation, and barnstorming would soon be a dying art. Some pilots, though, took their
That's good. That's very good. Because it's insane. Okay, it's insane.
daredevil skills to the next level. More even than barnstorming, aviation records and the heroes that set and broke them familiarized Americans with the potential of aviation. Frenchman Joseph Sadi-Lecointe was the first to sustain a speed over 200 miles per hour over several hours in 1922. And in 1923, he broke the ceiling record by flying at an altitude of 11,145 meters. But though records in speed, altitude, and range had been frequently broken in the 19-teens, new records occurred less and less frequently as the 1920s and 30s rolled along. But when they were broken, it was spectacular. While Sadi-Lecointe set the speed record at 205 miles per hour in 1921, Italian Mario De Bernardi was over 100 miles per hour faster in 1928, flying 318.5 miles per hour in his Machi M52. But there were many other aerial firsts to be achieved. In 1924, a team of American Army Air Service pilots completed the first aerial east-west circumnavigation of the Earth. And in 1927, Charles Lindbergh set out to be the first to make a solo, non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean. He bought his own Jenny in 1923, with which he went barnstorming in Texas, Nebraska, and Minnesota. He and his partner, Heston Benson, traded plane rides for room and board at local inns and hotels. He would charge a local $5 for a 15-minute flight, while his partner Benson performed wing walks and encouraged the audience to buy rides from Lindbergh. Lindbergh later wrote, "Some weeks I barely made expenses, and on others I carried passengers all week long at $5 each." He enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and passed his exams in March 1925, commissioned second lieutenant. In 1926, he taught at a flight school in the St. Louis area and flew airmail flights. That is when he had the idea of competing for the Orteig Prize, offered in 1919 for the first solo, non-stop flight between Paris and New York of $25,000. Many pilots had already died trying. Lindbergh carefully planned and calculated his flight, although the press did frame him as Lucky Lindy afterwards. With the help of some St. Louis businessmen, he bought a custom-designed Ryan NYP, New York to Paris aircraft, a high-wing monoplane with a, for the time, gigantic tank containing 2,750 pounds of fuel. After renaming the plane the Spirit of St. Louis, he took off on the morning of May 20th, 1927, from New York. His venture had attracted some real attention by then, as many saw him as an all-American pioneer of aviation. The nation held its breath for the duration of the flight, and after 33 hours and 30 minutes of dizziness and sleep deprivation, Charles Lindbergh made it to Paris. He instantly became a figure of mythical proportions, but more importantly, showed the world what could be expected of aviation, causing investors to sink loads of money into the aviation industry and boosting the credibility of civil aviation. For the first time, people began to seriously imagine intercontinental air travel, even for the average Joe. It wasn't just Lindbergh.
That would be, that's amazing, how after something like that, the fruition of intercontinental travel was starting to become a realization. I'm just wondering, the people who were taking these planes from one continent to the next, was it also like these open canopy planes? Because if that's the case, these people were suffering. I mean, imagine it's cold, it's windy, it's loud. But maybe they were in like enclosed airplanes during that time. I think. I hope. I really hope, because wow, guys, this is just. You can imagine how exhausted he must have felt as soon as he landed in France, in Paris. Ah, wow.
Though, who triggered people's imaginations and changed public perception of air travel. After his success, many women aspired to be the first female to cross the Atlantic. Some of them just went as a passenger of a male pilot, but what mattered to them and the public was just to be the first woman to cross by plane, which caused enormous excitement in and of itself. Some tried and died, some had to be rescued. The fifth to try was the famous British aviatrix Elsie Mackay. She even tried to make the crossing in February, for which people called her insane, as planes were not very well suited for icy circumstances at the time. Several days after her departure, parts of her plane washed ashore on the Irish coast. In the spring of 1928, no woman had still ever crossed the Atlantic by plane. A 55-year-old wealthy woman named Amy Guest decided she'd fly or be flown. She bought a plane in secret and planned to end her trip in front of British Parliament in London. After her family got wind of her plans, though, they persuaded her to not do it, but instead have someone else take her place. It was a woman called Amelia Earhart, a young pilot who had flown since 1921.
Wait a minute, Amelia Earhart. I remember. Yes, from Star Trek. It wasn't Star Trek Discovery. No, it's Star Trek Voyager. Yes, Star Trek Voyager. I'm not sure about the season 3 or 4. Amelia Earhart was, like there was an actor acting as Amelia Earhart in the TV show, and she was abducted by aliens. Yeah, I think that's what happened. I can't remember right now. She was abducted by aliens, but people on Earth thought that her plane crashed somewhere and they could not find her body. They could not find her partner's bodies because, I think it was her and her, her co-pilot. I'm not sure if there was a third person in there, but I know it was her and her co-pilot in the plane. And I don't know what I think she was circumnavigating the world, or she was going from one continent to the next. I can't remember, but they said that her plane went missing, and they never found her body. They never found the plane. But in Star Trek Voyager, they kind of filled that hole or filled that mystery by saying that her plane was abducted by aliens. And she was abducted by aliens, and she had been stuck in stasis for, I think, how many years it's been? Like 1,000 years or something? I can't remember how many years. But, it's been for a very long time. She's been in stasis, and she was only, awoken up by the Voyager crew, that were investigating a planet that had a very weird energy signal. When they beamed down there, they saw that, there were people in these stasis chambers or stasis cubicles, and they awoke them all up. All the people that were in stasis, they woke them up. And one of them was Amelia Hart and her co-pilot. Yeah. And then, from then on, it just continued on with Captain, the captain of the Voyager. What's her name again? I forgot her name. Captain Janeway, yes. Captain Janeway, she was so emotional. She was happy to see Amelia Earhart. She was, telling Amelia Earhart about her accomplishments and what she did changed everything for women in terms of aviation, and how much she has become like a hero to Captain Janeway. Like a person to look up to. And yeah, it was a very nice episode. Very, very nice episode. The fact that I still can remember, pieces of it, that means it was very good. Like, really, I really did enjoy Star Trek Voyager, and I enjoyed the episode that had Amelia Earhart in it. Yeah, specifically. Okay, let's continue.
She had set the female altitude world record already in 1922, flying 14,000 feet high. In April 1928, she joined pilot Wilmer Stultz and co-pilot Lewis Gordon. They departed from Newfoundland with their Fokker F-7B on June 17. 20 hours and 40 minutes later, they landed in South Wales in the UK, and Earhart became the first woman to ever cross the Atlantic in an airplane. While she didn't fly the plane herself, she would later be the first woman to actually make a solo flight across the Atlantic in 1932. And then she would disappear in 1937, attempting a trip circumnavigating the Earth. With Lindbergh and Earhart, as well as many others, the new modern era of civil and commercial aviation began. And the sky was the limit. Lindbergh himself would go on to promote aviation as a reliable form of transport, touring with the Spirit of St. Louis through North and South America. Actually, one of the first ways in which aviation impacted public life was in the postal service. By 1925, 14 million letters and packages were sent yearly in the U.S. The 1925 Airmail Act lay the foundation for the establishment of commercial airmail services, setting airmail rates and authorizing the government to sell airmail contracts to private enterprises. The 1926 law went further. It established official airways and required the government to build civil airports and develop navigational aids. In 1927, the Department of Commerce constructed hundreds of light beacons, 95 emergency landing fields, and 17 radio stations to provide pilots with weather information. Still, airmail was heavily subsidized by the government and was not lucrative on its own. Under Postmaster General Harry S. New, though, air service began to enter a more mature stage. He had airmail carriers also double as passenger transports. That way, they would make more money, making longer flights financially viable, which led to the establishment of the first American passenger airlines. The Ford Trimotor 5AT was used by almost all the U.S. airlines. These planes, introduced in 1928, could carry 14 or 15 passengers together with their baggage and packages and mail. Western Air Express experimented to see if airlines could profit from passenger fares alone, and 5,000 passengers were flown from Los Angeles to San Francisco in a year. But the company could not make ends meet without the airmail subsidies. It was not until 1930 that the system was reorganized and passenger aviation began to be available to the masses at a reasonable price. And even then...
Yeah, I can see that, the expenses, or should I say the price for buying a ticket on a plane must have been really expensive, considering the maintenance of the plane, the employees, the pilots, the requirements from government or from government institutions in terms of licensing. It must have all been very expensive. And then you have to top it all off with fuel as well, fuel for the plane. From where it's leaving and where it's going to be landing, So it had to be really, really expensive. And even if they did bring down the prices, it still wouldn't be something that is viable for the common man on the street, It will still be a bit too expensive. But it will open the door for those who can try to afford, a ticket and go to the destination. But otherwise, everybody else will either be using a bus, a taxi, and train services, as usual. And then planes will just be seen as something of like a dream, like an aspiration to achieve one day, not something that I'll be using day in, day out. Yeah.
For a long time to come, in fact, not until after World War II, commercial air travel was neither cheaper, nor faster, nor safer, nor more comfortable than rail travel. Planes had to fly around high mountains. It was dangerous to fly at night. They had to stop often for fuel or maintenance. Additionally, it was very uncomfortable to fly in the badly isolated, loud, unpressurized planes. But sure, there were already people traveling by air, albeit next to some postal sacks, and the first airfields began equipping their ports with passenger terminals and waiting rooms. Besides, thanks to people like Lindbergh and Earhart, the potential was fully recognized everywhere. The number of airline passengers in the U.S. was less than 6,000 in 1926, but grew to some 173,000 3 years later. The 1920s was when aviation became mainstream. It was a time of development, innovation, investment, experimentation, and dreams. Harry Guggenheim, son of a multimillionaire, established a foundation to train aeronautical engineers in universities. This delivered new technology like that which allowed James Doolittle to fly without visual bearings, but only navigating with instruments like a very accurate barometer, artificial horizon, gyroscope, and a radio direction beacon. Similarly, the NACA, the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, which would later become NASA, was the American government's sponsor of the aviation industry's technology. They invented the NACA cowling in 1927, which was basically a hood for the plane's cylinder heads, but it reduced drag by as much as 60% and really streamlined aircraft, which improved fuel efficiency and speed. The cowling and other inventions like retractable landing gear allowed aviation to become ever more commercially viable. It soon allowed the first successful airline plane, the DC-3, to be launched in 1935. I have been talking a lot about America in this episode, I know, and that's mainly because it is exemplary for the aviation situation worldwide. French, British, German, Soviet airlines were also established in the 20s and began flying regular routes in 1920. Lufthansa was founded in 1926 and aggressively grew into one of the most profitable air companies in Europe, with some of the best airplanes as well, like the Junkers Ju-52. However, European air travel was mainly used for colonial routes, as the European countries were a lot smaller than the US and trains were much easier. There too, commercial airlines were not able to exist without airmail subsidies. Civil aviation in the 1920s and 1930s lay the groundwork for the transportation of people in a military context as well. Concepts, techniques, and sometimes even models of airplanes were applied to troop transports, and fighter and bomber airplanes developed rapidly over the years as well. Many people thought that in future, aerial warfare would replace all other branches of the military, and the German and Italian bombers used for the devastation of civilian populations in the Spanish Civil War, or the Japanese ones that terrorized China, showed that every technology has a dark side. That dark side grew in strength and power and blossomed when the Second World War broke out, as millions of civilians around the world, people who had nothing to do with the war, found themselves under attack again and again. First by the Axis powers, but soon by all sides. Their homes and possessions destroyed, or their bodies and their lives ruined by murder from the skies, as what the hopeful pioneers and barnstormers began descended into darkness. If you would like to see an episode about that aerial warfare and the bombing of civilian targets, you can check out our third episode of the War Against Humanity series right here. Our patron of the week is Daryl Allen. Please consider supporting us on Patreon just like Daryl, because without you all, we wouldn't be doing any of this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. See you next time. Notice I didn't have a drink this episode? Prohibition.
Mr. Nidell, you could have just drank like water. I mean, that's what I'm drinking. I'm drinking water. Just drink water and you'll be fine. Okay, guys, that was from Aerobatics to terror bombing civil aviation between two wars, 1927, part 2 of 2. Yeah, this was an interesting episode in terms of, you know, how the aviation industry grew from it just being solely the possession of the military and very important people, and now it's being accessed by, you know, the public, and, you know, the public are allowed to acquire airplanes, you know, from the military. Of course, they're like demilitarized planes, you know, not having the weapons and all that stuff, but, you know, they are aeroplanes, and, you know, the public, many people have taken interest in buying them and being self-taught in how to fly in planes and how to navigate as well. Some people who fought during the World War I now are in possession of, you know, airplanes themselves, and, you know, a culture of aviation innovation and entertainment, and as a hobby started to grow in America and probably elsewhere across the world as well. And women were also taking interest into it. Many people of color were also taking interest in it, you know. So yeah, it grew very fast, and because of that, also, you know, there was lack of oversight. There was lack of a department head to watch the aviation industry grow, but in a regulated and safe manner, you know. And you know, people were becoming these crazy stunt devils, trying to impress the public, trying to make a business out of this. And you know, many of them lost their lives, many of them destroyed entire businesses, all in the pursuit of them getting a quick $5 buck. I'm not sure how much $5 was during those times, like in the 1920s. I'm not sure how much $5 was, but maybe it was a lot of money. But yeah, you know, they tried to make a lot of money, but at the cost of safety, at the cost of people's property. And many of them lost their lives. Many of them destroyed properties that did not belong to them. And yeah, it was really like the wild west in terms of the aviation industry. But the government started to rein all of that in, you know, tried to control it, tried to keep it regulated and safe for everybody. And you know, putting some requirements, especially like, you know, an exam, what was it, like a practical exam as well as a written or theory exam, what had to be done before you were able to have the qualifications for you to fly a plane. So that's also good. And you know, all the men and women who tried to accomplish what was thought to be the impossible, going from one continent to the next. Some people even tried to circumnavigate the world. And yeah, it's just all around a positive story in terms of the aviation industry, you know, how it started to grow. Yes, people did get hurt, and yes, people did die, but you know, it had an amazing start. It had an amazing start, and it had an amazing continuation until you could say until the Second World War, when this technology was fully realized in its capabilities, and you know, people used it for war, and it killed and destroyed a lot of people across the world. And even still today, you know, we depend on the aviation industry to transport us across the world, but you know, there's still that bad side of it where people make these jet planes that are fast, that carry so many missiles and other armaments that it could destroy a small town, you know. So yeah, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the aviation industry. And yeah, guys, I guess that's it. That's it for tonight. If you liked the video, remember to give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I will see you next week Tuesday. Okay, bye bye.